Number 15. The Devils, 1971. Ken Russell's historical drama remains one of the most controversial nun films ever made. Based on Aldous Huxley's book about a 17th-century French priest accused of witchcraft, the film features explicit scenes of sexual hysteria among nuns, including a notorious sequence where Vanessa Redgrave's sister Jean masturbates with a charred bone after fantasizing about Oliver Reed's father Grandier. The film faced brutal cuts worldwide, with the BBFC demanding nearly 20 minutes of excisions for its UK release. In the US, the film was rated X, and theaters that showed it faced protests from religious groups. What particularly outraged viewers was the blending of religious imagery with explicit sexuality, and the suggestion that religious ecstasy could be indistinguishable from sexual frenzy. Even in its heavily edited form, The Devils remains a shocking exploration of religious hypocrisy and political corruption that continues to be difficult to see in its original uncut form. Number 14. The Nun, 2013. Guillaume Niclus' French drama based on Denis Diderot's novel follows a young woman forced into a convent against her will. What sparked outrage was its unflinching portrayal of institutional cruelty and psychological torture within religious orders. The film depicts the protagonist Suzanne's suffering as she's punished for refusing to take her vows, including scenes of isolation and abuse. Several Catholic organizations called for boycotts, particularly in France and Italy, where the film was seen as an attack on religious institutions. The controversy intensified when the film's star, Pauline Etienne, revealed she had received threats from religious extremists. What made the film particularly incendiary was its suggestion that convents could be prisons rather than places of spiritual fulfillment, and its portrayal of Mother Superiors as psychologically manipulative figures rather than spiritual guides. Number 13. Alucarda, 1977. Mexican director Juan López Moctezuma's horror film became notorious for its blasphemous imagery and eroticized violence involving nuns. The story follows two orphaned girls who become involved in satanic rituals at a convent, leading to scenes of demonic possession, self-flagellation, and blood-soaked religious iconography. Catholic groups worldwide condemn the film for its juxtaposition of sacred imagery with explicit horror elements. The film was banned in several countries and faced heavy cuts in others. What particularly outraged religious viewers was the scene where possessed nuns tear apart a Bible and engage in what appeared to be demonic sexual ecstasy. The film's poster, featuring a nun in a suggestive pose with blood dripping from her mouth, became an iconic image of exploitation cinema and was banned in multiple countries. Alucarda represents the extreme end of nunsploitation cinema, pushing boundaries to shock audiences with its blend of religious imagery and transgressive horror. Number 12. Agnes of God, 1985. Norman Jewison's psychological drama, starring Jane Fonda, Anne Bancroft, and Meg Tilly, sparked controversy for its portrayal of a nun who gives birth and claims the child is the result of a virgin conception. What outraged religious groups was the film's ambiguous treatment of miracles versus mental illness, suggesting that religious experiences could be manifestations of psychological trauma. Catholic organizations particularly objected to scenes showing a blood-smeared convent and the implication that a nun might have been sexually active. The film faced protests in several cities, with some religious groups picketing theaters. Despite its relatively restrained approach compared to other films on this list, Agnes of God challenged fundamental religious beliefs about miracles, virginity, and the nature of divine intervention, making it deeply unsettling for devout viewers. The film's refusal to provide clear answers about whether the events were supernatural or psychological only increased the controversy. Number 11. Stigmata, 1999. This supernatural horror film starring Patricia Arquette as an atheist hairdresser who developed stigmata wounds provoked outrage for its suggestion that the Catholic Church was suppressing a gospel, suggesting that God could be found in all people, not just through institutional religion. What particularly angered Catholic groups was the film's portrayal of church officials as corrupt conspirators willing to commit murder to maintain their authority. The Vatican issued an official condemnation, calling the film defamatory and heretical. Several Catholic organizations called for boycotts, and some countries considered banning the film outright. The controversy intensified when promotional materials featured Arquette in a pose resembling crucifixion with stigmata wounds visible. Stigmata sparked outrage not just for its horror elements, but for its theological implications, challenging the authority of the Church and suggesting that institutional religion had corrupted Jesus' original message. Number 10. The Last Temptation of Christ, 1988. While not strictly a nun film, Martin Scorsese's biblical epic sparked unprecedented outrage for its portrayal of Mary Magdalene, played by Barbara Hershey, as a prostitute who later becomes a follower of Jesus, and for its depiction of a Jesus who experiences sexual temptation. The film's most controversial scene shows Jesus, Willem Dafoe, imagining himself married to Mary Magdalene and having sexual relations with her. Religious groups worldwide condemned the film as blasphemous, with protesters blocking access to theaters in several cities. The controversy was so intense that the film's home video release was delayed in some markets. What particularly outraged viewers was the suggestion that Jesus experienced human sexual desire and that religious figures might have complex sexual identities. The film faced bans in several countries and prompted death threats against Scorsese and others involved in its production. Even decades after its release, The Last Temptation of Christ remains one of the most controversial religious films ever made. Number 9. Dark Waters, 1993. Mariano Bino's Italian horror film follows a woman who travels to a remote convent to uncover the truth about her mother's death, only to discover a community of nuns practicing dark rituals. What sparked outrage was the film's graphic depiction of violence in a religious setting, including scenes of torture, cannibalism, and sacrilegious rituals. The film was banned in several countries and faced heavy cuts in others. Catholic groups particularly objected to scenes showing nuns engaged in violent rituals and the implication that religious communities could harbor such dark secrets. The controversy intensified when promotional materials featured imagery of nuns with blood-stained habits and weapons. Dark Waters represents the intersection of nunsploitation and horror genres, pushing boundaries with its blend of religious imagery and extreme violence. The film's suggestion that religious devotion could mask violent tendencies made it particularly disturbing for religious viewers. Number 8. The Nun and the Devil, 1973. Also known as The Nuns of St. Archangel, this Italian nunsploitation film sparked outrage for its depiction of sexual repression and sadism within a 16th century convent. The film follows a young woman forced into a convent who discovers the Mother Superior and other nuns engaging in torture, sexual perversion, and even murder. What particularly outraged viewers was the graphic depiction of religious figures engaging in explicitly sexual and violent behavior, including scenes of lesbianism and sadomasochism. The film faced bans in several countries and was heavily edited in others. Catholic groups condemned the film for its suggestion that convents could be hotbeds of sexual perversion and violence. The controversy intensified when promotional materials emphasized the film's sexual content with suggestive imagery of nuns in compromising positions. The Nun and the Devil represents classic nunsploitation cinema at its most provocative, blending religious settings with explicit sexual and violent content to maximum shock value. Number 7. Sacred Flesh, 1999. This British horror film caused outrage for its explicit depiction of sexual repression within a convent. The story follows a Mother Superior who struggles with sexual visions of Jesus, leading to scenes of eroticism and violence in a religious setting. What particularly shocked viewers was the film's juxtaposition of religious imagery with explicit sexual content, including scenes of nuns engaging in self-flagellation and sexual ecstasy. The film faced bans in several countries and was heavily edited in others. Religious groups condemned the film for its suggestion that religious devotion could be intertwined with sexual desire, and for its graphic depiction of religious figures in compromising situations. The controversy intensified when promotional materials featured provocative imagery of nuns in sexual contexts. Sacred Flesh represents the extreme end of nunsploitation cinema, pushing boundaries with its blend of religious imagery and explicit sexual content. Number 6. Convent of Sinners, 1986. Also known as Monica del Peccato, this Italian period drama sparked controversy for its depiction of sexual repression and hypocrisy within a 17th century convent. The film follows a young woman forced into a convent who discovers the community's hidden sexual practices and power struggles. What outraged viewers was the film's explicit depiction of nuns engaging in sexual behavior, including lesbian relationships and affairs with priests. The film faced bans in several countries and was heavily edited in others. Catholic groups particularly objected to the film's suggestion that religious communities could be centers of sexual activity rather than spiritual devotion. The controversy intensified when promotional materials emphasized the film's sexual content with provocative imagery of nuns in compromising positions. Convent of Sinners represents classic nunsploitation cinema at its most provocative, blending historical settings with explicit sexual content to maximum shock value. Number 5. The Convent, 2018. Paul Hyatt's British horror film follows a group of thieves who break into a remote convent only to discover it's inhabited by demonic nuns. What sparked outrage was the film's graphic depiction of violence in a religious setting, including scenes of torture, murder, and sacrilegious rituals. The film faced criticism from religious groups for its portrayal of nuns as demonic figures and its graphic violence in a religious setting. The controversy intensified when promotional materials featured imagery of demonic nuns with weapons and blood-stained habits. While not as widely banned as some other films on this list, The Convent sparked outrage for its blending of religious imagery with extreme horror elements, suggesting that religious spaces could be sites of demonic activity rather than spiritual sanctuary. The film's graphic violence in a convent setting made it particularly disturbing for religious viewers. Number 4. Mother Joan of the Angels, 1961. Jerzy Kawalerowicz's Polish drama follows a convent where nuns claim to be possessed by demons, based on the same historical events that inspired the devils. What sparked outrage was the film's intense psychological portrayal of religious hysteria and its suggestion that religious ecstasy could be indistinguishable from sexual frenzy. The film faced censorship in several countries, including Poland, where it was initially banned for its controversial religious content. Catholic groups particularly objected to scenes showing nuns in states of religious ecstasy that appeared sexual in nature. The controversy intensified when the film won awards at international festivals, bringing attention to its challenging portrayal of religious phenomena. Mother Joan of the Angels represents a more artful approach to controversial religious themes than exploitation films, but still sparked outrage for its psychological complexity and its suggestion that religious experiences could have dark, unsettling undercurrents. Number 3. The Beguiled, 1971. Don Siegel's Civil War drama starring Clint Eastwood as a wounded Union soldier taken in by an all-girl Southern seminary sparked controversy for its depiction of sexual tension and violence in a religious setting. What outraged viewers was the film's portrayal of religious women as sexually repressed figures who become violent when their desires are awakened. The film faced criticism for its suggestion that religious devotion could mask dangerous sexual repression. The controversy intensified when promotional materials emphasized the film's sexual content with suggestive imagery of the female characters. While not as explicitly banned as some other films on this list, The Beguiled sparked outrage for its portrayal of religious women as potentially dangerous when their repressed desires surface. The film's blend of religious setting with sexual tension and violence made it unsettling for viewers who expected more conventional portrayals of religious women. Number 2. The Sinful Nuns of St. Valentine, 1974. This Italian nunsploitation film caused outrage for its explicit depiction of sexual perversion within a convent. The story follows a young woman who enters a convent only to discover the nuns engaging in various forms of sexual activity and violence. What particularly shocked viewers was the film's graphic depiction of religious figures in explicitly sexual situations, including scenes of lesbianism and sadomasochism. The film faced bans in several countries and was heavily edited in others. Catholic groups condemned the film for its suggestion that religious communities could be centers of sexual activity rather than spiritual devotion. The controversy intensified when promotional materials emphasized the film's sexual content with provocative imagery of nuns in compromising positions. The Sinful Nuns of St. Valentine represents classic nunsploitation cinema at its most provocative, blending religious settings with explicit sexual content to maximum shock value. Number 1. Immaculate, 2024. Sydney Sweeney's recent horror film sparked controversy even before its release for its portrayal of a young nun who discovers dark secrets within her convent. What caused outrage was the film's graphic depiction of violence and reproductive horror in a religious setting, including scenes of forced pregnancies and medical procedures. Religious groups condemned the film for its portrayal of a convent as a site of physical and psychological violation rather than spiritual sanctuary. The controversy intensified when promotional materials featured Sweeney in a blood-soaked habit and imagery suggesting reproductive horror within a religious context. While the film hadn't been widely released at the time of this writing, it already faced calls for boycotts and criticism from religious organizations. Immaculate represents the latest entry in controversial nun cinema, combining modern horror sensibilities with traditional religious settings to create something that continues to push boundaries and spark outrage among religious viewers.